All right. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for your patience. All right, so we were talking about implied lines, and I wanted to go through the rest of this quiz because this quiz helps us prepare for Module 3 as well. Again, for everybody, Module 4 is to be done before Module 3. All right, here we go. So the first one is just asking you to describe where the delineated forms are. And as we go down, the next one is identify the two most common rigid materials artists or sculptors use in constructing artworks. People that have taken this quiz sometimes get confused about this. They'll talk, and what we're asking for is not just common, but also most historical. So if we look at these lists, there's 8 different materials here. I mean, sorry, there's 4 different materials here. If we're talking historical as well, what is the first answer we are not going to be able to use?
Plastic. Anything
Plastic. Exactly. So we know that number 1 and number 4 are not the right answer. Historically speaking, also, what other material is probably not going to be used?
I'd say probably metal, because we see glass, we see wood like in a lot of places, and we also see glass a lot in like stained glass windows. All of that is what I'm thinking.
Well, when we're talking about historical, glass shows up an awful lot more recently than metal does. The Romans used glass for sculpture, and that's about 2,000 years ago. But about 3,000 years before that is when people started actually using metal. So even though that's a really good answer, the answer that we're looking for is this number 2. The 2 most common rigid materials are going to be metal and wood. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is glass is relatively more recent than metallurgy. Another one is that even though you do see glass in a lot of stained glass windows, I do stained glass windows. I design them, I build them. It has historically and still remains used an awful lot less than metal is, sadly. No account for taste. But yeah, but most of those are really good answers. Now we look at question 3. Fiber arts can be made durable in outdoor conditions by adding a hardening compound. Have either of you had experience working with fiber arts?
No.
Now I know that Diana is a fierce knitter.
Yeah.
There are a lot of materials that can be used, that can be added and have been used historically with fiber to make it a lot more endurable. One of the more common ones today is resins that are used. And really ancient ships, things like pine tar were used as a hardening compound. So if we want to make fiber arts durable for outdoor conditions, definitely we can do that by adding a hardening compound. Now, this question number 4, this is one that kind of ties back to that very first question about delineated forms right here. This, we're talking about negative space. Can either of you talk about your experience with negative space? What is negative space?
Negative space is the space inside the positive space that's not taking up physical space, but it's the non-physical space in between.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right. So looking at this is a Henry Moore sculpture. Negative space is what allows us to separate his sculpture from the background, from everything around it, from all that background noise. So the negative space, if you can see my mouse, is the area that kind of defines how that head looks. The negative space gives us this form here that almost looks like a stylized chicken's head, that where the positive space is made by the arm and the body of the sculpture. The negative space is the space in between them. Pardon me. And that's important because when we're working with three-dimensional stuff, the negative space or the artist's awareness of negative space really draws a viewer in. That's when I use terms like activating space around it, it's because you're doing things that are interesting in your sculptures, which both of you did in your wire pieces, that make the air around it feel like it's important. You know, you're doing things that give a sense of texture or activity on the surface of the work that you do. And that's really important. When people are building things where it feels like the arm or a portion of the sculpture is pushing against the area around it or leaning against something that's not there, that's when we start talking about activating negative space. So yeah, that was an excellent answer. Now with forced perspective, when we talk about forced perspective, have either of you worked on like building set designs for somebody for like a stage production? Or have you done work where you wanted people to feel like they were looking at an interior space? Have you ever done anything like that?
I think the closest I've gotten to doing that would be like when I was practicing perspective, making it, but it was just drawing. And I was like
Yeah,
trying to make it look like you're looking into the room. But other than that, I haven't done any like physical set design.
Well, and I think what you're talking about ties directly into what we're talking about, because that kind of perspective that you use in a drawing to force an awareness of a volume that doesn't really exist is sculptures will use that in a 3D space to make areas of a sculpture feel larger than they actually are, to make you feel that there's a shape going on that isn't really happening. And it is a tool that sculptors will use quite a bit. And it's exactly that. It's basically those perspective style drawings, but just applied to three-dimensional structure. And well, after you guys look at this quiz and stuff, if you have questions about it, we can go over the rest of it next week. I don't think that'll be a problem at all. I do want to address one other question. One of the things you'll read about is like lost wax casting, which is where somebody makes wax sculpture, then encases it with a material that can be fired so that all the wax melts out and you have a hollow space inside, and then you pour metal in. And this question is, what's one reason why wax is most often used to cast another material? And there's a number of reasons. One is metal is a lot more expensive than the wax. Wax is really cheap. Can you imagine any other reasons why you might use wax to do that lost wax casting?
It's also like very malleable. And it's like
Yeah,
if there's any
exactly.
mistake, you can just heat it up again and like fix it.
Yeah, exactly. Very much so. You can get textures in wax so much easier than you could in almost any other material. And then when you cast it in a metal, it becomes permanent. But yeah, excellent. Can you think of any third reason?
this is a guess, but does wax set up more quickly than a metal would, so you can get your final shape more rapidly, creating it in
Yeah.
wax first?
Yeah, it sets up quicker and it melts quicker. It responds to temperature a lot faster. So with metal, if you're working with metal, a lot of the times it stays hot for a long time. Wax, it will cool down very quickly, and it will also melt very quickly. With when I was teaching bronze casting at BYU, we were heating the bronze up to about 2,400 degrees. The wax will all melt and flow out if you get it up to about 200 degrees. So yeah, and it's the same thing is true. It may take a couple days for the bronze to cool down so you can touch it. With the wax, it may take a couple minutes. And when I was doing it, I was working with just a cup of cold water. I could make a form and then apply a wet paper towel on it. It would cool down and turn solid immediately. So yeah, and those are all really good answers and ideal for that quiz. So excellent. Now I'm not going to turn back to the quiz right now. We can talk about it more next week. But one thing that I'm noticing is, as people are working with the quizzes, almost everybody is getting really good at referring to the textbook. So when you guys are taking the quizzes, it's really important to refer to the textbook chapters that are referred to in the quiz, because that will get you the best answers all the time. And if you're missing any points on the quiz, look at the notes that I've made, which answer you need to look at, or which answers you need to look at, and then just redo the quiz with that fixed, and then I can give you more points. Let's see, and I wanted to show you the assignment for structure with a skin. So I'm going to be sharing this again. I wish there was a faster way to do this. I just have to, hit all the right buttons and stuff from my point. For the assignment on this, what you're going to do, everybody has a kit that has a lot of stick-like things. You have a hot glue gun, you have a bunch of stuff like that. And you have, around your home, you have lots of bits of paper, things like that. If you got your quiz after you did your house, you're going to have file folders in that kit. What we're going to be doing for this part of the process is dealing with those issues of structure and skin. Remember, we were looking at the Eiffel Tower, the undergirding of the Statue of Liberty, and then noticing that there was a copper skin on the Statue of Liberty. The difference between what we're doing and the Statue of Liberty is that right now, as you see it, you can only see that exterior skin. What we want to play with is the idea of being able to see both the structure as well as the skin at the same time, so that both of them feel equally as important to the overall effect of the sculpture that you make. Now, what is one thing that you notice about the use of skin on all three of these examples?
To me, it looks like it's all very strategically placed. So it's like compositionally, like it guides the eye through the structure. It makes it really like nice and appealing to look at.
Yeah, that I could not have, even if we didn't plan that, I could not have asked for a better answer. Yeah, that is exactly what it is. The skin, like Diana's saying, is strategically placed. Now, people use completely different rationales for each of these pieces, but you notice that everything doesn't have everything isn't all covered with the skin. Some of the areas, like on this middle piece, the skin is in front, like on the upper right, and it's behind a little bit on the bottom left. And on the piece that's all the way to the right-hand side of these three examples, you can see that there's a little bit of skin here and there, so that sometimes it's hiding the sticks, that are used for the structure. Sometimes it's behind the sticks that are used for the structure. And like on this one on the bottom left, it almost feels like it's a plate, but there's like Diana was saying, it's all very strategically placed. So what we're going to be doing on this is deciding on a module, and the module is going to be about the size of your fist. And you're going to make maybe 4 to 8 of these modules, and then you're going to be putting skin on some faces of the module, and then you're going to be putting the modules together. When we talk about a module, on the far left-hand side, you see that the student made a module that looks essentially like a box made out of sticks. And then it looks to me like they made 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these boxes made out of sticks. And some of them, or several of them, are identical, but a few of them, like this one in the front and the one right there that my mouse is on, and then this one, this third from the top, they have these little triangular cutouts as well. So they're not all perfectly identical, but each of them have at least one piece of cardboard as a face. Like this one, that one, and the top one all have one piece of cardboard. And then this one has at least 2, this one has at least 2, and this one has at least 2 pieces of cardboard covering the faces. But like I said, some of them you can look all the way through. Some of them have the cardboard hiding some areas, and the others have cardboard on the far side of the sticks. So like Diana said, they're strategically placed. Now this middle sculpture, on this one, there's 8 modules, but on this one, the modules are all exactly identical. And what do you notice about the placement of the paper as well on each module?
I'm seeing that they all like overlap and then they go kind of like a wave.
Yeah, exactly. Each module is constructed with the paper identically, and the way they put it together, like Diana said, things are kind of overlapping in a circular motion this way on the left-hand side, and then a circular motion the other way on the right-hand side, so it feels like a wave. And the way that they've done that, by doing that, you can look around the sculpture, and in some areas you'll have the paper between you and the sticks, and in other areas the paper will be on the far side of the sticks from you. So the sticks will be in between you and the paper. So I think this is another really good way of addressing the idea. Then what can you say about the modules on the far right-hand side? This structure. To me, it doesn't really feel like there's a module that's as solidly defined as in this middle one and on the left-hand side. What it feels like to me is that these modules are each made up of, several different trapezoid shapes, like right here, right here, right here, and right here. And those trapezoid shapes are kind of glued together to make it to feel almost like a weird ladder-like snake form that I really like. But what's going on here is that it gives us all these little triangles and other shapes for the person to stick the paper on. So some of the paper pieces are triangles like this, some of them are trapezoids, some of them cover the whole face like this one does, some of them cover only half of the face. And so this person didn't exactly make the module the same way as the other people did, but it does feel like there's a rhythm that's generated where the form that they've created is repeated over and over again. Do you guys both see that?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So you're going to design it, you're going to construct it like that, and some of the things to be paying attention to are creating the modules and then covering some portions with paper and others leaving blank so that you have a really good balance of being able to see the sticks and being able to see the paper. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the different kinds of materials that you can use. It doesn't have to be paper. What other things do you think you could use to create that skin type shape? I'll give a couple suggestions. One is a couple people have used thread or string, and they'll wrap the faces of their modules with the string. Other people have even knitted, I'm not going to say doilies, but those granny square type of things, and they've changed them so that the shapes fit the faces of the modules, and they've glued that on. I've also seen people use their hot glue gun and draw strings of webbing with the hot glue back and forth and making it almost look like spider webbing for the faces. So that's a couple different things that people have used in addition to paper. But you can also use several kinds of paper. You can use wrapping paper. I would almost hesitate to use most wrapping paper because a lot of wrapping paper will have designs on it that are kind of distracting. But if you're conscious about the designs, that can look really interesting. Other people have used tissue paper. So you have like almost translucency to it. That's less translucent than plastic wrap, but more translucent than regular printer paper would be. So there's a couple different things that you could do that way. When people are making their modules, a lot of the times people will put the sticks together with hot glue at the joints and then wrap it with something else like string or thread. That can be really interesting. Some people have been really creative about the sticks they use. Instead of using the sticks that are in your kit, several people have taken paper and rolled it up really, really tightly. Like from, for example, using origami paper and rolling it up diagonally. So you have like this round toothpick type form. And that can be really interesting. So there are a lot of different kinds of options that you can use. Some of the things that we want to avoid as you go into this are making modules that are just cubes, so that they just look like die that you would use to play Yahtzee with. If you want to do that, I would think about how can you make that more interesting. One way to make it more interesting than just a cube is to put another stick in where you're connecting opposite corners. And that can be really interesting because then your eye wants to see other things. And then if you connect opposite corners, you have some diagonals going on inside the cube. And with that, you can add paper on the interior. You can add paper triangles and have skin on the inside of these cube forms. And that can be really fascinating too.
I don't know if it's my computer, but you're kind of like cutting off a lot.
Oh, that is really frustrating. I hope it's your computer, because if that comes through on the recording,
You're not cutting. You're not cutting on mine. I'm getting clear sound on my end.
Okay, all right, good. So Diana, you may have to watch the recording again after we're all done to get the because I was so eloquent. And you missed that with your computer cutting the sound. But I want you to kind of play with this idea, keeping in your mind the idea of the repeated module for one thing, and then also playing with both skin and structure, trying to balance them so visually they're both important. You want to intrigue a viewer, you want the viewer to want to turn your object around or to walk around it. And sometimes it might be nice to imagine, what if this thing was on campus and is 12 feet tall? And what you're making is actually a scale model for the full size piece that you're going to build for campus. I think that's kind of a fun way to look at it too. So I would like you to consider those kinds of things as you're coming into this assignment. And when you get to a point where you're getting a little bit frustrated or whatever, go back and look at the background artists and particularly look at Frank Gehry And oh, the guy that built the Epcot Center, that of course I don't remember. Buckminster Fuller. You know, look at both of those artists, Buckminster Fuller and Frank Gehry. I think those are the two strongest for what we're dealing with in that whole posse of artists. Alrighty. Do you guys think that you have a better understanding of that module now that we've talked about it? Okay. And when we talk next week, please let me know how you're doing time-wise, because if we need to, I'll extend the date on that a little bit. I don't have a problem doing that at all. Then I wanted to go back and visit a little bit about our diversity collaborator discussion. And I just wanted to have you look at some of the things that other people came up with after we talked last week. For this, I really like when you see propaganda art done for different, like particularly wars and different things like that. What is really fascinating to me is how dehumanizing the propaganda art becomes. You know, when can you guys both see these two posters? Okay.
Yes.
All right. The one on the left is one that's done by the US. And then the one on the right is one that's done by the Japanese or the Japanese government. And I love this comparison that this person did, Madison, because you can see that both groups of both governments are doing the exact same thing for their people, which is trying to dehumanize and turn the governmental enemy into a monster rather than human beings. Because, you know, human beings are not designed to attack each other and hurt each other. That's not what we do. All around the world, anytime there's an emergency, more often than not, by a huge extent, human beings drop what they're doing so that they can help each other. And there's a lot of energy put into when your nation goes to war, there's a lot of energy put into making sure that the enemy is identified as something other than somebody who's like you. You know, and I think this is a really good example of that. And then I really like this that Madison shows as an image of unification, because then you have these almost something that appears to be almost like celestial parents, and they're made up of all these little dots. And then as you come closer, you realize that all these little dots are people of all shapes, sizes, and colors. And I think that that is really beautiful, because as this goes back, everything becomes more and more unified. And you're left thinking also, maybe the whole sky is filled with this kind of unified diversity as well. So I think that that's a really good example. Both of those are. And this is a really interesting comparison as well, because this person shows on the left-hand side something similar to what we just saw. And it's, you know, very dehumanizing. And on the right-hand side, the same style of art is being used to deliver a message that hopefully is very counter to it. And I think that that's a really good and interesting comparison as well. And these are two different images that I think are really interesting as well. Are you guys familiar with the work of Kara Walker? Have you ever heard of her before?
I feel like I've heard her name, but I'm not sure if it's like the person I'm thinking of, did she make like this big painting, like it's a wall with like figures and it's like black and white, the whole thing? Is that her?
Yeah, yeah, she does a lot of paper cutouts and things like that. And one of the more recent sculptures she did was a gigantic sphinx made out of sugar. And Kara Walker is just absurdly remarkable in my mind. She is a powerful woman, a woman of color who has never been anybody's victim. And what I love about her work is it can be really uncomfortable and unsettling to look at and deal with, because she does not shy away from horribly painful truth. And the reason she does it is not to make people hate each other, but to force people to confront reality and use that confrontation to reassert or to empower themselves to move forward without doing the same thing again. And so I think her stuff is really remarkable. So she does a lot of the silhouette kind of work. And it's, like I said, it can be really painful to look at sometimes. I think that beauty is not always going to be something that's pretty and easy to look at. Sometimes the way to healing is by cleaning out a wound with a wire brush or stripping off a scab. It's going to hurt. And that's what Kara Walker really gives voice to. So yeah, I think her work is something that's difficult to experience, but in the end, I think ultimately it's healing and beautiful. So these are really good examples. And then we looked at the Minstrel Jubilee. Are you guys familiar with that kind of musical show? The minstrel or blackface show. It was where it originated with entertainers, both white and black, painting themselves to look like the other, and then doing a show that was intended to be humorous and entertaining. If we looked at it today, it would just be in the absolute worst taste possible. It's incredibly offensive and really, really nasty. But for the time, again, it's looking at this stuff. We have to take it, we have to appreciate it in context. Well, not even appreciate it. We have to understand it in context, which means for at the time, the people that, most of the people that were being entertained by this, they were not even aware how painful, how hurtful this kind of material was. And it is very divisive. And what I appreciate is a lot of people who have done historical research on this material are letting us know about it so that we can use it as an incentive, its existence as an incentive never to do the same thing again. And I think that's the purpose that it serves now, more than anything else. But one thing that is really horrible about this is it identifies the really powerful stereotypes that people were using to dehumanize their fellows, that were living side by side at the same time period in the same areas. And it's just really awful. Would you guys, either of you, hazard a guess as to who the most photographed man of the 19th century was? He's essentially the most famous photographed man of the 19th century, and that was Frederick Douglass. Even more so than Abraham Lincoln, which was really close. And so in the same century that brought us the horrible nature of blackface also brought us what Frederick Douglass said was the most democratizing force in art that the world had ever seen, which was photography, when he said absolutely anybody had the power to have themselves depicted in the same magnificence as any head of state of Europe in the way that they wanted to be depicted and remembered. So I think that's pretty important. And I love this mural, My People. where it shows all sorts of different individuals. And I think that that's wonderful because, you know, you look at this top image, you look at the bottom image, and it is completely different feeling. And the reason it's a completely different feeling is that it's a completely different reason for creating the art. And I love that comparison. I think it's beautiful. So I go through the rest of these and look at them, and we can even talk about this more next week. But it's what's interesting to me, looking at these kinds of things, you know, art that's dividing or derisive and art that is uniting, is we can make a pretty harsh critique about the blackface minstrel show because it is nasty, it is horrible. What kinds of things do you think 100 years from now people are going to be critiquing about our society? You know, how thoughtless are we? And even I remember the kinds of jokes that were popular in my high school 40 years ago are things that now are absolutely despicable. You know, and we're all products of the culture that we swim in. And I think that we need to keep that in mind as we critique other elements, other cultures, other historical periods. But that also doesn't mean we give them, you know, a blank hall pass. Because even though I don't think it's fair to be angry at people who have been dead for hundreds of years, I think we can use that information to energize us and empower us to ensure that it doesn't happen again. You know, like I mentioned last week about the brutal extermination of so many Chinese Americans in the 19th century. You know, and the laws where America was supposed to be this land of promise, but if you were of Chinese descent, you could not ever become a citizen until World War II. I think that those kinds of things in our background can be ultimately something that we should use to incentivize ourselves to never make sure it doesn't happen again, for one thing, but also to honor the struggle and the pain that those people went through to prepare the world so that it becomes this place where it will never happen again. You know, and I think that's probably a big takeaway for that. And art is one of those things that we use when words simply are far too small to express what needs to be said. So, but anyway. So any questions or comments about what we've talked about so far today?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you answered everything.
Okay. All right, great. Then Tuesday, I look forward to talking a little bit more about the structure of the skin. And I'm almost caught up with grading everything. I'm like 95% there. And I should have everything up to date by this weekend easily, so everybody will know exactly where they stand. And in the meantime, if you guys do have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me, and I will make sure we get that in on our next meeting. All right. And I did want to ask too, for people to start thinking about critiques. I don't think I want to ask anybody to volunteer to do a critique on anybody else's art yet. I would like everybody to look at those videos that I have that link to, and then we'll talk more about it next week. And when we get done with the structure and skin, I think we'll have enough items in the discussions that people can look at and then start picking from to do critiques of other people's work. So, and when you do a self-critique, you know, who's always going to be our worst critic? You know, it's always going to be ourselves. One of the most frustrating things about being artists is that we can't help it. We're perfectionists and we're self-critical. And it's not because we honestly don't feel we have anything to say. It's a lot of it is we're constantly on the lookout for how we can improve. And sadly, that translates to being hyper self-critical. So when you start thinking about those 4 tools of artistic critique, which we'll talk more about next week, and applying that to your own work, I want you to really concentrate on pretending it's not your work and pretending it's the first time you've ever seen it, because that will help you to sidestep your natural tendency to be hyper self-critical, which I've had students in the class when they've done that start crying because they realize, holy cow, I really did put a lot of thought into this. It really does mean something important. And I want you guys to have that same experience too, because honestly, if you guys were as bad as you think you are about your own work, or what you say to yourself about your own work, you would not be as far as you are right now. You know, if you were on it. So that's something that I want you to really steel yourself against during this class. Try really hard not to be hyper self-critical. And when you do critique on your own work, pretend it's the first time you've ever seen it. Please. All right, well, I will look forward to seeing you guys next week. And if I can't edit these 2 videos together, I will just have everybody watch one right after the other. So they'll both be equally important. And I really do appreciate your patience with me today. Thank you very much. And I hope you guys have an incredibly wonderful weekend.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
You
too.
too.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you